Imagine this. In 1940, Disney promised children a magical world where wishes came true, with Pinocchio presented as an innocent fable and a happy ending. But the original story, serialized in Italy decades earlier, ended with a hanged puppet and an outpouring of grief from real child readers. Behind every frame, Disney erased lies, a record of brutal child exploitation, including execution, enslavement, and a near-total loss of safety for the poor. How did this nightmare become a bedtime story? And what was Collodi really warning us about? On February 7, 1940, Walt Disney's studio unveiled its second animated feature, Pinocchio, to American audiences. The film arrived just 3 years after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs had redefined what a cartoon could be. Disney promoted Pinocchio as a family musical fantasy, a technical marvel filled with lush animation, rich color, and a sweeping musical score. Its story seemed simple and comforting. Geppetto, a lonely woodcarver, wishes on a star that his puppet will become a real boy. A kindly cricket named Jiminy takes up the role of conscience, guiding Pinocchio through a series of temptations and dangers, including Stromboli's puppet show, the lure of Pleasure Island, and the monstrous whale. Each challenge mixes fear, humor, and gentle lessons about honesty and bravery. For generations, this is the Pinocchio most people remember. The wooden boy is innocent and eager to please, his mistakes presented as honest blunders rather than willful acts. Jiminy Cricket, with his top hat and umbrella, becomes a symbol of conscience, always there to nudge Pinocchio back on track. Even the film's darkest moments, like the transformation of boys into donkeys on Pleasure Island, are brief, shadowy detours on the way to redemption. The ending promises hope. Pinocchio, after rescuing Geppetto and proving his worth, is granted the gift of real boyhood. The Blue Fairy's magic restores the family, and the story closes with celebration and the famous refrain, "When you wish upon a star, your dreams come true." Over the decades, critics have praised Pinocchio as one of Disney's finest achievements. Its animation set new standards for realism and emotional depth, and its songs became standards. Today, it holds near-perfect scores from reviewers and is often ranked among the greatest animated films ever made. For many, Pinocchio stands as the model of a classic children's tale, warm, reassuring, and safe. A bedtime story where danger is always temporary and goodness always wins. But behind that legacy, the film quietly draws a curtain over the story's original darkness, leaving only faint echoes of the world Collodi once described. Picture this. In the summer of 1881, Italian children opened the first issue of Giornale per i Bambini and found a story that did not promise a happy ending. Collodi's puppet, carved from a discarded piece of wood, was not destined for fairy tale redemption. By the 15th chapter, Pinocchio had been chased by masked assassins, really the fox and the cat in disguise, caught by the neck and strung up from an ancient oak tree. The text lingers on the moment. The biggest of the bandits grabs him by the throat and lets him dangle from a branch. They settle in the grass to watch his last dance. For hours, the puppet kicks and writhes, eyes wide open, mouth clamped shut. Finally, the bandits grow bored and leave, promising to return for his coins once he is nicely dead. The story stops cold. Pinocchio, limp and motionless, left hanging from the tree, looking more dead than alive. For months, that was the end. There was no rescue, no blue fairy, no second chance. Collodi had written a cautionary fable in which the price of disobedience was execution. Readers, mostly children, were not comforted. Letters began to arrive at the magazine editorial office. Some begged to know what happened next. Others pleaded for Collodi to save the puppet, to write more chapters, to undo the hanging. The editor, Ferdinando Martini, faced a wave of protest he could not ignore. He pressed Collodi to continue the story, to bring Pinocchio back from the brink. Only then did the serial resume, months later, with the fairy's intervention and the promise of a different fate. The original ending was not a misunderstanding or a lost draft. It was published, circulated, and read as a finished story. Children across Italy were left with the image of a puppet swaying from a tree, punished for trusting the wrong adults and refusing to obey. The public outcry forced Collodi's hand, but the message was clear. In the world he described, bad choices could be final. The shock of that hanging ending and the demands for a rewrite revealed just how far the original Pinocchio stood from the bedtime story Disney would later create. If you want to see more hidden histories behind familiar classics, subscribe now. There is much more to uncover in the pages that Disney left behind. Picture Pinocchio's earliest days on the page. They are anything but innocent. The very first adult he meets is the talking cricket, who tries to warn him, "Woe to boys who refuse to obey their parents and run away from home." Pinocchio's answer is swift and final. He grabs a wooden mallet from the workbench and throws it across the room. The cricket falls from the wall, dead as a doornail. There is no accident here, no remorse. The puppet simply shrugs and moves on. Violence is not a one-off. Alone and untaught, Pinocchio stumbles through a world that gives him neither comfort nor guidance. One winter night, he falls asleep with his feet propped on a stove for warmth. By morning, both feet have burned to blackened stumps. The book lingers on the grotesque image. His feet were burned off completely and had become two little charcoal stumps. When Geppetto returns, he finds his creation maimed and helpless. After a burst of anger, the old man sits down and carves him a new pair of feet. It is a moment of desperate tenderness in a world that offers little of it. Gratitude is fleeting. Geppetto, who owns almost nothing, sells his only coat to buy a spelling book so the puppet can go to school. Pinocchio slips out the door and within hours trades the primer for a ticket to the puppet theatre. He squanders his father's sacrifice without a second thought. Again and again, Collodi's Pinocchio lashes out, betrays, and takes what he wants, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and bruised relationships. This is not the gentle, bumbling child of Disney's film. In the original, the puppet is a street kid, violent, impulsive, and shaped by the poverty that surrounds him. Picture Geppetto's world, a single cold room, hunger gnawing at the edges. He owns almost nothing but the tools of his trade and a threadbare coat. When Pinocchio begs for a spelling book to attend school, Geppetto steps out into the winter streets and sells that coat, the only thing keeping him warm, just to buy the primer. In Collodi's Italy, this was not sentimental fiction. It was a daily calculation for millions. By the 1881 census, more than 6 out of every 10 children aged 10 to 14 were economically active. That is 64.3% of children not in classrooms, but in fields, factories, and workshops. In textile mills, boys and girls worked 13, sometimes 15 hours a day, their hands raw from spinning and weaving, their lungs filling with dust. There was no safety net. For many families, a child's wages meant the difference between eating and starving. The cost of this poverty was measured in graves. In towns near Bologna, death registers from 1865 to 1880 show 186 out of every 1,000 babies died before their first birthday. That is nearly 1 in 5 infants lost before they could ever learn to read or work. Disease, malnutrition, and overwork stalked every household. Childhood was short and uncertain. Policing too reflected this reality. When Pinocchio runs wild in the street, a carabiniere arrests Geppetto for suspected abuse, jailing the father and leaving the child unsupervised. The law punished poverty and offered no protection. In this world, a parent could be stripped of both dignity and custody, while children slipped through the cracks, left to fend for themselves or be swept up by those promising work. Every detail in Collodi's story mirrors the real risks poor Italian families faced, where survival meant sacrifice and children were all too easily lost. Picture late 19th century Italy, where the line between childhood and labor was almost invisible. The transformation of boys into donkeys in Pinocchio's land of toys is more than a fantasy twist. It is a blunt metaphor for a society that treated poor children as beasts of burden. In the novel, the promise is simple: a paradise with no school, only games and freedom. But as days pass, the boys begin to change. Ears lengthen, tails sprout, hands harden into hooves. Laughter gives way to braying. The text lingers on the horror as each boy loses his voice and his name, reduced to an animal fit only for work. This is not just a cautionary tale about skipping school. In 1881, Italy's census reported that nearly 2/3 of children aged 10 to 14, over 64%, were already working. For most, school was a brief interlude, if it happened at all. The rest of childhood belonged to fields, factories, and workshops. Boys and girls labored 13, sometimes 15 hours a day, their bodies bent to the rhythm of adult need. In the story, once the transformation is complete, the donkeys are sold off to circuses, farms, and mines. Some are worked until they collapse. Others, like Pinocchio, are discarded when they become lame. The fate of these fictional donkeys mirrors the real fate of children who were used up and then abandoned by the adult world. The land of toys is not a place of escape. It is a trap designed to lure children away from education and turn them into silent laborers. The braying of donkeys in Collodi's pages stands in for the cries of countless real children whose lives were spent in work, not play. For them, the price of a few days' freedom was a lifetime of servitude. Picture Mangiafuoco's puppet theatre, packed, the air thick with sawdust and sweat, when Pinocchio tumbles on stage. The showman's name literally means fire eater, and his first impulse is to throw the wooden boy onto the flames to roast his dinner. The threat is not a joke. Collodi's text lingers on Mangiafuoco's hunger and the casual calculation that a child's body can be burned for fuel. Only a sudden burst of pity spares Pinocchio from the fire. The lesson is clear. In this world, a child's worth is measured by how much he can be used up. Freedom is always conditional. Pinocchio is soon caged and forced to perform, the profits flowing to the adult who owns the stage. If he fails to entertain, the threat returns. He will be chopped into firewood. The showman and puppet masters, who crisscross Collodi's pages, see children as property, to be locked up, displayed, and sold off when they stop earning. The blue fairy stands as the lone exception. She rescues Pinocchio, shelters him, and offers kindness, but always with a catch. Her help comes with lessons and warnings. If Pinocchio wants to become human, he must study, obey, and prove himself good. In Collodi's Italy, almost every adult system is built to extract or to discipline. The only escape from exploitation is to submit to authority and accept the rules of the new nation. For a child like Pinocchio, rescue is never free. It is earned, tested, and always conditional. Carlo Collodi was born Carlo Lorenzini in Florence in 1826, the son of a cook and a servant. He grew up in the shadow of Italy's old aristocracy, but his own family scraped by on working-class wages. As a young man, he fought in the wars that tried to unite Italy, then spent years as a political journalist and satirist, always with an eye on the problems facing ordinary people. Before Pinocchio, Collodi wrote a series of children's books that doubled as lessons in geography and civics, designed to shape the habits of Italy's youngest citizens. His most famous effort, Giannettino's Journey Through Italy, was meant to teach boys about their new country and the discipline expected of them. In 1877, just a few years before Pinocchio appeared, the Italian Parliament passed the Capino Law. For the first time, primary schooling became compulsory for children between the ages of 6 and 9. The law threatened fines and even jail time for parents who kept their children out of school. It was a dramatic attempt to pull children out of fields and workshops and put them into classrooms, at least in theory. But the reality was more complicated. Most poor families still needed every pair of hands to survive, and the state's reach was patchy. Collodi's stories, with their sharp warnings about truancy and the dangers of idleness, echoed the new vision of childhood being pressed into law. In Pinocchio, the path from puppet to real boy runs straight through obedience, education, and the acceptance of civic duty, a manual for turning unruly children into disciplined citizens. Picture a chain of hands, all feeding the same machine. The coachman's operation in Pinocchio follows a chain that, by today's standards, is unmistakable. Boys are identified by informants like Honest John, singled out for their resistance to school or authority. Promises of endless fun, no rules, and free tobacco lure them in. They are loaded onto coaches and ferried by boat to a remote island, far from their families and any outside protection. Once there, the boys are kept under watch, encouraged to drink and to smoke and to destroy property, all under the coachman's supervision. The transformation that follows, boys losing their voices, turning into mute beasts, and being sold in bulk, mirrors the steps later codified in international law. The United Nations Palermo Protocol, adopted in 2000, defines child trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of a child for the purpose of exploitation. For children, consent is irrelevant. The coachman's pipeline, the sequence of recruitment, transport, confinement, and sale for forced labor, fits that definition precisely. The narrative, written in the 1880s, anticipates the legal language of modern anti-trafficking efforts. Yet when Disney's animators adapted Pinocchio, the most disturbing elements were quietly removed. Internal studio notes describe early versions of the puppet as too cold and unlikable. Scenes of deliberate violence, such as the murder of the cricket and the burning of Pinocchio's feet, vanished from the script. The hanging was erased. What remained was a sanitized journey where the machinery of exploitation is hinted at, but never fully shown. The coachman's trafficking ring becomes a brief, shadowy episode that slips past the memory of most viewers. Picture a classroom today. Every child present is one spared from the fate Collodi encoded into Pinocchio. Trafficking and child labor remain global crises, with the International Labour Organization estimating 160 million children at work in 2021. Fairy tales may change, but the machinery that exploits childhood persists. Before we wish upon a star, we have to reckon with the world that still sells children's futures. Share your thoughts below.